itself. We are going to consolidate all this evidence to answer that core question. Is this actually happening? And, if so, when?
Yeah, we're really looking at that transition from a campaign promise to what we call governance reality. We need to analyze the specific language being used by the administration to determine how close we actually are to seeing money in bank accounts.
Because there is a massive difference between a tweet and a treasury deposit.
A world of difference.
So let's unpack this. We have to start at the source of all this buzz. The president didn't just drop a hint, right? He made a formal announcement on a Sunday via Truth Social, and then he came back on Monday and said it again.
Right, the double down.
But he used a word that, I have to say, it stopped me in my tracks.
You're talking about the word dividend.
Yes, exactly. In 2020 and 2021, all we heard was stimulus. We heard relief. Stimulus implies we're trying to, jumpstart a dead battery. It feels like an emergency measure.
It does.
Dividend sounds corporate. It sounds like something from Wall Street. Why the change? What's going on there?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? Stimulus is, it's classic Keynesian economics. It means the government is either printing money or borrowing money to inject cash into the system to juice demand. It's a sugar rush for the economy.
Okay.
A dividend is completely different. A dividend is a share of profits that's paid out to shareholders.
So if the U.S. government is the corporation in this analogy,
Then you, the citizen, are the shareholder. By using that specific word, the president is framing this payment not as a handout, not as a form of welfare, but as a return on investment for the American citizen.
wow.
He is trying to completely change the psychology of the payment.
That is a fascinating psychological shift. It makes it feel earned, not given. And he's tying it specifically to tariffs, correct?
He is. The whole implication is that the government is collecting revenue profits, essentially from these tariffs on imported goods. And instead of that money just disappearing into the black hole of the general treasury,
Which is what usually happens.
it's what always happens. But here, he wants to distribute a share of that profit back to the owners of the country.
It's almost like the Alaska Permanent Fund. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but residents there get a check every year from oil revenues.
That is a perfect analogy. It's the exact same concept. But here, the oil is trade tariffs. He's treating the country's trade policy as a direct revenue generator for households.
So on Monday, he doubles down. He reiterates the plan. But what stood out to me in the source material is who he says this is for. The posts explicitly mention the money is for everyone except high-income people.
Which is, it's a classic populist move,
Yeah.
but it leaves a massive amount of room for interpretation.
Okay, but that's the part that makes me nervous. Room for interpretation in Washington usually means loopholes or delays. If they don't have a hard number for what high income even means yet, are we just, engaging in wishful thinking here?
It's a risk.
High income in New York City or San Francisco is completely different from high income in rural Alabama.
It is. And that ambiguity is where the political risk lies. I mean, it sounds great on paper. Everyone except the rich gets paid. But we need to dig into the details to see who actually qualifies. Because for a senior on Social Security or a young family struggling with rent, that definition of high income matters a whole lot.
A whole lot.
If they set that bar too low, millions of middle-class people who really need the help, could get cut out completely.
Exactly. And to get any kind of clarity on that, we have to look away from the social media posts. I mean, tweets are easy, math is hard, and so we need to talk about the man who's supposedly holding the calculator, Kevin Hassett.
Kevin Hassett, yes. He is the economic advisor within the administration. He's the numbers guy. And in the source material, there's a very, very telling clip of him being, grilled by a reporter. This wasn't a friendly chat. This was a press interrogation.
I watched that clip. The reporter asks the question that I think every single economist in the country is probably screaming at their television set. He asks, is this like paying off a credit card using an overdraft?
And that analogy just cuts right to the heart of the fear that people have, right? Are we just borrowing money from one pocket to put it in another?
Yeah.
Are we just driving up the national debt to send out these checks, which at the end of the day just causes more inflation?
Right. If you give me $2,000, but inflation goes up by 10% because of it, I haven't actually won anything. I've probably lost ground.
Exactly. But Hassett, he pushes back hard. His rebuttal is fascinating. He argues that if you look at how much tariff revenue is actually coming in, there's specific room created by that revenue. He's arguing there's enough money to cover these checks without digging into the existing budget or printing new money.
Okay, I want to pause the tape right here and do some napkin math because trust me, the math works is something politicians say right before we find out the math definitely does not work.
Let's do it.
So we have roughly 330 million people in the U.S. Let's say, after we remove children and the so-called high earners, we're talking about paying maybe 200 million adults. Does that sound right?
That's a reasonable estimate. It might be slightly less if the income cap is pretty strict, but yeah, let's use 200 million as a working round number.
Okay, so 200 million people times $2,000. That is $400 billion.
Correct. 400 billion. And that is a massive amount of money. Just for context, the entire U.S. military budget for a year is around $800 billion. So we are talking about finding half a military budget in the couch cushion somewhere.
So the big question is, can tariffs actually cover $400 billion?
Well, let's look at the numbers. The U.S. imports roughly $3 trillion worth of goods every year, give or take.
Okay, $3 trillion.
So if you were to slap let's say, a uniform 10% tariff on everything, that raises about $300 billion. So we're short.
We're short.
But if you were to slap a 20% tariff on everything, that raises $600 billion. Then we have a surplus.
So mathematically, it is possible. It's not crazy talk. Yeah.
It is mathematically possible if, and this is a huge, huge if, the administration is willing to maintain high tariffs across the board on almost everything coming into the country.
That probably explains why the source material calls the math optimistic. It relies on those tariffs sticking around and I guess on import volumes not crashing because of the high tariffs.
Optimistic is a very polite word. Usually these things are far more complicated than money in, money out. However, and this is the key point for you listening, the source notes that if the economic advisor says it works, they are proceeding on that basis. The administration is operating under the assumption that the money is there.
I see.
They aren't acting like they need to find it. They're acting like they already have it.
But Hassett said something else, and I think this is probably the most important reality check in this whole deep dive. He admitted, quote, it will require legislation.
This is the hurdle. This is the big one. The president cannot just sign a check tomorrow. We live in a democracy with a separation of powers. Appropriating funds, spending money, is the sole job of Congress.
So there's no way he can just do an executive order for this?
Highly, highly unlikely. I mean, there are some emergency powers, but for a dividend based on trade policy, that needs a bill. Hassett confirms they are actively studying the matter and getting the numbers straight to give the president choices, but he explicitly states it requires legislation.
Which means?
That means a bill has to be written, it has to be introduced in the House, it has to go to the Senate, and it has to pass both.
And we all know how fast Congress moves. Sometimes it feels like they're moving in reverse.
Sometimes it does.
Which brings us to this question of momentum. Because you can have the best idea in the world, but if the key players in Washington aren't on board, it just dies in committee. But that's not what we're seeing here, is it? We're seeing what looks like a full court press.
We really are. And this is where we bring in the other two major players from the source material, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Let's start with Scott Bessent. Why does what he says matter more than, say, what the Press Secretary says?
Well, because the Press Secretary's job is to sell the message. The Treasury Secretary's job is to actually move the money.
Okay.
If the Press Secretary promises you a check, that's nice. It's good PR. If the Treasury Secretary promises you a check, that's banking policy. That's when the gears start turning.
And Bessent was asked directly about this. And he's the one who gave us our first real clue about eligibility, about who might get this money.
Who did? He mentioned a potential threshold. He said they're discussing families making less than $100,000.
Okay, let's pause on that. Less than $100,000 for a family. That is a massive chunk of the country. That's not just a small program.
It's huge. It would target the middle class, the working class, low-income earners, and significantly, it would cover almost every single retiree on a fixed income.
Right.
If you are on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or you're receiving VA benefits, unless you have some massive external investment income you're hiding, you are going to fall under that $100,000 cap very, very easily.
That is exactly what our listeners need to hear. If that number holds, and again, Bessent did say it is in discussion, it means this isn't just a poverty relief measure. It's a broad economic injection. It's designed to hit the majority of American households.
And when Bessent was asked the million-dollar question, or I guess the $400 billion question, is the White House committed to making this happen? His answer was as definitive as you can get. He said yes.
No waffle. No, we'll see, or we're looking into it.
No waffle whatsoever. He said the White House is committed to making that happen. When a Treasury Secretary uses the word committed, that sends a huge signal to the markets and, more importantly, to Congress that this is a top priority.
And then you have Carolyn Leavitt, the press secretary, backing him up, right?
Right. Her role is all about messaging discipline, and she was right on message.
Yeah.
She reiterated that the president wants to make it happen, and then she confirmed that the team is looking into all legal options.
So let's just connect all the dots here. You have the president tweeting it, not once but twice. You have the economic advisor saying the math works, even if you have to squint a little. You have the Treasury Secretary defining a potential income limit. And then you have the press secretary confirming the commitment.
This is what we call a coordinated rollout. It's not just the president firing off a tweet late at night and his staff scrambling to figure out what he meant.
We've seen that before.
We have.
Yeah.
This is different. The Treasury, the press office, the economic advisors, they're all singing from the exact same song sheet. And that suggests a very serious policy push, not just an off-the-cuff remark.
But I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. There is a real danger in this level of coordination. The source narrator kept bringing up this idea of them painting themselves into a corner. What exactly does that mean in this context?
It's what I call the tight corner theory, and it's a real thing in politics. Think about the political history of the U.S. Think about George H.W. Bush saying, "Read my lips, no new taxes." When you make a promise that specific and you break it, it can end careers.
Right, and by having multiple high-profile officials all promise a specific number, $2,000, not $600, not some relief, but $2,000, they have raised hopes to a fever pitch.
Exactly. If you tell a family that's struggling with grocery bills or a senior who's deciding between medicine and heat that $2,000 is coming, they start mentally spending that money, they plan on it, it becomes real to them long before the check is even printed.
And so if the administration fails to deliver after this level of hype,
the political backlash would be absolutely severe. You create a deep sense of betrayal. In a lot of ways, it's worse than never having promised it at all.
So in a weird way, the fact that they're hyping it this much actually makes it more likely to happen because the political cost of failure is just too high for them to bear.
That is the logic. Yes. They are burning the boats. They're removing the option of backing out gracefully. The source even mentions that lawmakers are potentially warming up to the idea. And that's because public pressure acts as a catalyst for legislation.
How so?
Well, when constituents start calling their representatives and their senators asking, "Hey, where's my dividend check?" It becomes very, very hard for Congress to ignore, regardless of their party affiliation.
Okay, so the momentum is there. The commitment seems to be there. But let's get down to brass tacks, logistics. Our listener is sitting there, I'm sure, thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but when do I get the money? Is it next week? Is it next month? Before the holidays?
And this is where we have to take a deep breath and just manage expectations. We have to address the hard truth that was found in the sources. Both Leavitt and Hassett were very, very clear on this specific point.
They said they don't have a timeline.
Correct. The quotes were, "I don't have a timeline, and we haven't decided yet." They are still very much in the studying phase.
That is just tough to hear when bills are due today. You know, it feels like a stall tactic to some people.
It feels that way, I understand, but it's the reality of the legislative process. Even if they introduce the bill in Congress today, it takes time to debate, time to vote, and then time for the IRS and Treasury to actually set up the distribution system.
Yeah.
So while the commitment is there, the date is not.
Not even close.
We are not at the stage where the IRS is queuing up direct deposits.
And we should probably clarify eligibility again, just to be absolutely safe. We heard the $100,000 number for families. What about individuals? Any word on that?
The source material focuses almost exclusively on the family number, but historically in the previous stimulus rounds, the individual number was usually half of the family number, or sometimes a bit more, like 75%.
So what would that be?
If the family cap is 100,000, we might expect an individual cap somewhere around 50,000, maybe up to 75,000. But again, the key takeaway from what Besson said is that high-income earners are explicitly out. This is targeted relief.
So let's speak directly to the people who need this the most. If you are a senior on a fixed income Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or a veteran living on your benefits,
you are almost certainly in the target audience for this policy. The administration is looking to help those who feel the immediate impact of inflation the most. If you're on a fixed income, you don't get a cost of living raise from an employer when prices go up. This dividend is designed to be that raise.
Now, I need to pivot to something that is extremely important. We have to do a serious public service announcement here because whenever there is talk of, free money from the government, the vultures start circling.
This is critical. So please listen closely to this part. Because nothing is approved yet, remember what Hassan said, legislation is required. That means there is currently no mechanism to send this money. There is no list to sign up for. There is no portal to enter your information.
Which means if you get a phone call, a text message, or an email saying, click here to claim your $2,000 dividend, or pay this small fee to expedite your check.
It is a scam 100% of the time. Without exception, the White House, the IRS, the Social Security Administration, none of them will ever call you or text you asking for personal information for a check that hasn't even passed Congress yet. They already have your information from your taxes or your benefits.
Please tell your parents, tell your grandparents, tell your neighbors. Scammers absolutely love this kind of news cycle because it creates confusion and it creates hope, and they prey on that hope. The rule is simple. Wait for official legislation. If a bill hasn't passed Congress, the money doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. Keep your guard up. If someone asks for a processing fee to get your dividend or for your bank account number over the phone, hang up immediately.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. We've covered the what, the who, and the when, or the lack of a when, but I want to ask about the why. Why are they pushing for this right now? Is it just to be nice?
In economics, and especially in Washington, it's rarely just about being nice. It connects back to the broader economic strategy. We talked about the tariffs. Tariffs are, by their nature, controversial. Critics say they raise prices on imported goods, that toaster or TV we buy at the store.
Right, so if tariffs make my Walmart run more expensive, I'm going to be angry at the administration that put them in place. Unless I get a $2,000 check in the mail.
Exactly. The administration wants to show an immediate, tangible benefit from those trade policies to the average citizen. If you pay, say, $10 more for an imported toaster, but you get a $2,000 check in the mail that's funded by those tariffs, the policy feels a lot more successful to you personally. You feel like you came out ahead in the deal.
So it's an attempt to redistribute the revenue from trade policy directly to households. It's creating a direct line between an America First trade policy and your actual bank account.
Precisely. It's about getting public buy-in. They need the public to support the overall tariff strategy. And the best way to do that is to share the profits, so to speak. It turns the abstract concept of international trade into a tangible benefit that you can see on your kitchen table.
So what is the path forward from here? What needs to happen next for our listeners to actually see this money? We don't want to leave them hanging with just theory and hypotheticals.
We can break it down into 3 clear steps based on what Hassett and the others have said. Step 1, the administration finishes studying the numbers.
Yeah.
They need to finalize their math so they can present a solid, defensible plan that doesn't get laughed out of Congress.
Okay, so they need to prove on paper that the tariffs can really pay for it.
Step 2, a bill goes to Congress. The president's team will likely draft the language, but a member of the House or Senate has to actually introduce it. So you should keep an eye on the news for a specific bill number. That's when it gets real.
And step 3, of course.
Lawmakers vote. It has to pass the House and it has to pass the Senate. That's the process.
And based on the source material, what's our feeling on the probability here? Are we talking a long shot or something that could actually happen?
The source is surprisingly optimistic. They cite a high likelihood, based purely on the volume of talk. The thinking is, when you have this many high-level officials coordinating this loudly, it usually means they are going to push until something breaks.
They're putting their own credibility on the line?
They are. But we have to balance that optimism against the procedural reality. Congress can be slow. It can be unpredictable.
It can be agonizingly slow, but the pressure is on.
The pressure is definitely on.
So let's summarize the key takeaways for everyone listening right now. We want you to walk away from this with clear, actionable facts.
Okay. First, the proposal. It's for a $2,000 dividend check. Remember that word, dividend. It's distinct from a stimulus, and the plan is to fund it with tariff revenue.
Second, the status. The White House appears to be fully committed. We heard it directly from the Treasury Secretary and the Press Secretary. They are exploring all the legal options, but, and this is the big one, legislation is required.
And third, the timeline. There is no official date yet. I can't stress this enough. So please, do not spend the money before you have it, and please do not give your credit card number or any personal information to anyone claiming they can get it for you early.
That is the golden rule. We want to encourage you to stay informed, but also to be patient. Watch for official announcements from verified government sources only. Don't fall for the rumors, and definitely don't fall for the scams.
And maybe ask yourself this question. What would a $2,000 check actually mean for your budget right now? That is the question the administration is banking on. They know that for most people, the answer is a lot.
It would be a game changer for so many people. It would clear debts, it would fill pantries, fix cars, pay for medicine. It's not a small amount of money. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought. We talked a lot about this shift from stimulus to dividend.
Yeah, and it raises a really provocative question, I think, about economic philosophy. If the government can successfully fund direct checks through tariffs, rather than through traditional income taxes or by going into debt, does this fundamentally change how we think about the federal budget?
What do you mean?
Well, are we moving toward a model where the citizen is treated more like a shareholder in America Incorporated, where you get a payout based on the country's economic performance on the world stage? It's a shift that could redefine the entire relationship between the government and the taxpayer.
So it's not just about this one check.
It's not just about this one check. It's about how the government funds itself and you in the future.
That is definitely something to chew on. We will keep watching the numbers so you don't have to.
We'll be watching.
Thanks for listening to the Deep Dive. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and we'll...
Okay, let's dive right in. Picture this. It's a Tuesday morning. You're sitting there with your coffee. Maybe you're looking at your banking app and wincing a little bit.
We've all been there.
Exactly. Or you're just scrolling through your news feed, and then suddenly you see it. It's this one number, and it is absolutely everywhere.
It is.
In the headlines, on social media, cable news, $2,000.
It is absolutely the number of the week. And frankly, you could make the argument it's the most important number of the year so far, just given the context of everything.
It really is. And I think for a lot of people, I mean, especially if you remember 2020, 2021, that number, it just triggers a very specific memory.
Oh,
You
yeah.
think stimulus, you think emergency check, you think, okay, here we go again, the government is printing money.
Right.
But, and this is the thing that makes this moment so different and honestly a little confusing, the branding is completely different this time.
Totally. It's a fascinating shift in language.
We're not seeing the word stimulus nearly as much in any of the official statements. We're hearing a new word, dividend.
Which sounds like a small tweak, just semantics, But it actually changes the entire psychological framework of what this money is supposed to be.
Exactly. And that is why we are doing this deep dive today. We have a huge stack of source material in front of us. We've got transcripts from the White House press secretary. We have interviews with the Treasury Secretary, data from economic advisors, and of course, the president's own social media posts.
A lot to get through.
A lot. And our mission today is really simple. We need to separate the noise from the signal. Because I know you, the listener, are sitting there thinking the same thing I am. Is this real? Is this money actually coming?
Or is this just politics?
Is this just political vaporware designed to get us all excited for nothing?
And that is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Because usually in Washington, you get a lot of smoke without any fire. You hear about exploratory committees, or we're discussing the concept of a plan.
All that vague language. Yeah.
Right. But what we have in front of us today, I mean, this source material we're looking at, it suggests something very different is happening. We are not looking at anonymous sources or leaks. We are analyzing a detailed, coordinated update based entirely on the-record statements.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. The sheer intensity of this push is, well, it's surprising. It feels like they are sprinting toward this, not just floating a trial balloon to see what happens.
They are absolutely doubling down. There's no other way to put it.
Right. I mean, every time a reporter asks about it, the answer isn't maybe or we'll see. It's yes, we are committed. And that leads us to this theory that just kept popping up in our research, and they're calling it the tight corner theory.
A tight corner theory. And this is really the lens, I think, that we have to view this entire situation through.
I agree.
The idea is that the administration has promised so much, so publicly, and in such a short window of time, that they have effectively painted themselves into a corner where they almost have no choice but to deliver.
Or face the wrath of a very, very disappointed public.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. If you promise a dividend and then you don't pay it out, that's like a political default. It's so much worse than never promising it in the first place.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's dive into the core announcement itself. Let's strip away the hype for just a second. What exactly is on the table?
Well, let's start with the headline number because that's the hook. The proposal is for a $2,000 payment. And, as you just pointed out, the president is explicitly, very deliberately, calling this a dividend payment.
Dividend. I want to stick on that word for a second because words matter so much here. Stimulus just sounds like emergency aid. It sounds like the economy is sick, and this is the medicine.
That's precisely the distinction they're trying to make. A dividend is what you pay out to a shareholder when the company has a good quarter, a good year.
It's a share of the profits.
It's your cut. By using that word, the administration is completely reframing the relationship between you, the citizen, and the government's revenue. They're basically saying, hey, the country made some money on trade, and this is your piece of it.
It transforms you from a beneficiary of aid into a stakeholder in the country's success.
It's a really powerful branding shift.
And it didn't just come out of a dry press release.
Yeah.
This started with the president himself on Truth Social.
Right. And importantly, it wasn't just a one-off post. Our sources really highlight that he announced it and then followed up pretty quickly with what they're calling a double-down post.
So he's not backing away from it.
He's leaning into it. He is putting his name, his brand, directly next to that $2,000 figure. He owns this number now.
So the big question then, who gets it? Because there's always a catch, right? There's always fine print. And I'm thinking about, retirees, people on fixed incomes, families working 2 jobs just to get by. They hear $2,000, they need to know, am I included in this?
Well, the fine print is definitely still being written as we speak, but we do have some pretty strong clues. In the president's own posts, the phrasing he used was that the money is intended for, and this is a quote, everybody except high-income people.
High income. That phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
A lot.
Because that could mean almost anything. I mean, if you live in San Francisco, $100,000 a year, you're barely getting by.
Yeah.
In other parts of the country, that's a fortune.
It is very subjective. But we also have some more concrete statements from Kevin Hassett. Now, he's a key economic advisor here. He's the numbers guy.
Okay.
He clarified that the discussion, at least internally right now, revolves around families making less than, say, $100,000 a year.
Okay, $100,000. Now, that's a concrete number we can work with.
It's a concrete suggestion. We have to be clear on that. Hassett was very careful to say this isn't finalized, this isn't set in stone, but it gives us the ballpark. We aren't talking about a universal basic income for billionaires, but we're also not talking about something that's restricted only to those in extreme poverty. It's aiming right for that broad middle class and working class target.
And that's exciting to see a number like $100,000 thrown out there because that covers a massive chunk of the population. But it does raise more questions, doesn't it? Is that $100K per individual? Is it per household? Is it adjusted gross income?
And those are exactly the details that they're trying to lock in right now. But the intent, the broad distribution, that part is clear. I mean, if you are a senior on Social Security, you are very likely well under that cap.
Oh, for sure.
If you're a veteran on disability, you are almost certainly under that cap. The goal here seems to be to flood the zone with this liquidity for the vast majority of Americans.
Now, you mentioned earlier that this isn't just the president tweeting into the void. It feels like there's a full court press happening here.
That is the best way to describe it. It's a blitz. In the span of just a few days, we saw this incredibly coordinated push. It wasn't just the president. You had the whole machinery of government start to echo him.
So let's talk about the roster here. Who are the key players that we're seeing in these source clips and interviews? Because knowing who is talking tells you a lot about how serious this actually is.
Well, you've essentially got the triumvirate of policy execution here. First, there's Kevin Hassett, who we just mentioned. He's the numbers guy, the economic advisor. His job is to make the math work.
Right. Now how?
Then you have Scott Bessent. He's the Treasury Secretary. Now, that is a crucial voice because he's the person who would actually have to oversee the implementation. He controls the financial plumbing of sending out tens of millions of checks.
When the Treasury Secretary speaks, Wall Street listens.
They do. And finally, you have Caroline Leavitt, who is the White House press secretary. She's the official voice. When she speaks from that podium or in an official interview, that sets the administration's on-the-record position.
So what are they all saying? Are they hedging your bets or are they giving themselves wiggle room?
Not really, and that's what's so fascinating about this. Leavitt, for example, she explicitly stated that the White House is, and I'm quoting here, committed to making that happen.
Committed to making that happen.
Yeah.
That's pretty definitive language for a press secretary.
It is. Usually you get something like, the president is intrigued by the idea, or we're exploring options.
Right, something they can walk back easily.
Exactly. Committed is a bind. She also went on to say they are exploring all legal options, and she confirmed the president has made his desires very clear to his team. This isn't coming from the bottom up. This is a directive from the top down.
And then you add Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, into the mix.
Right, and he's been out there publicly discussing eligibility. Now, when the Treasury Secretary starts talking about who is eligible for a payment, that moves the entire conversation from wouldn't it be nice if to how do we operationalize this?
It becomes real.
It signals that the administration is aligned. We're not seeing any visible infighting on whether this should happen, only on how it's going to happen.
Okay, so let's recap. We have the, what, it's $2,000. We have the who, it's likely people making under $100,000 a year. Now comes the big one, the how. Where is all this money coming from?
The billion-dollar question. Or $100 billion question.
Right, because I can hear the skeptics already screaming, we can't afford this, we have a deficit, we have inflation concerns. Where does all this cash just suddenly appear from?
And this brings us right back to that brilliant branding, that dividend concept.
Yeah.
Kevin Hassett made a very, very specific claim in the interviews we analyzed. He said the funding would come from tariff revenue.
Tariffs. Okay, so the basic idea is we charge fees to other countries, or, well, to the importers, to bring their goods into the U.S., and that big pile of money then gets handed out directly to Americans.
That is the pitch, 100%. Hassett asserted that if you actually look at the tariff revenue currently coming in, there is, and this is his quote, enough room to cover these $2,000 checks without digging into the rest of the federal budget.
I have to ask the obvious question here. Is that true?
Wow.
I mean, $2,000 times, what, 150 million Americans?
Yeah.
That's a lot of zeros. That's hundreds of billions of dollars. Do we really have that kind of cash just sitting in a tariff jar somewhere?
It is a massive amount of money, and this is where we really have to put on our critical thinking caps and look closely at the source material. The narrator in the analysis we're reviewing points out a pretty significant discrepancy here.
What's that?
They note that if you look at the year-over-year tariff numbers that are publicly available, the math, quote, doesn't really make sense to a layperson.
It doesn't add up.
On the surface, based on the historical data that you or I can look up, it's very hard to see how current tariff levels would cover a multi-hundred billion dollar payout like this.
So what's the catch?
Well, the source also makes a fair point, which is that Hassett is the advisor with access to all the internal real-time data. He might be projecting future revenues from new tariffs that haven't fully hit the books yet. He might be seeing a revenue stream that the public charts just haven't caught up to.
There was this really interesting moment in one of the interviews where a reporter challenged Hassett on this exact point. They used this analogy about a bank overdraft.
Yes, that was a very sharp question.
Right.
The reporter asked Hassett effectively, isn't this just like using an overdraft to pay off your credit cards?
Ouch. I mean, that is a stinging comparison.
It is. They were directly questioning the financial responsibility of the whole idea. Is this real money, or are we just moving debt around from one column to another? Are we essentially borrowing from our future to pay ourselves a dividend today?
And what was Hassett's rebuttal to that? How did he respond?